Hello everyone and welcome, Nernstorm here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you my MagDK Dragonknight PvP build for the No-Procs Cyrodiil test. I've been absolutely crushing it with this build in Cyrodiil ever since the tests started. This build has been super effective at kiting enemy zergs and then killing players one by one until the entire zerg is dead, and has been surprisingly useful in unofficial 1v1s against random players in Cyrodiil as well. Whether it's a Magsork following the meta, a Stamcrow stacking heals, a Stamden with 40k HP and Arctic Blast spam, or a Werewolf StamDK jumping at you while you're trying to do your 1vx, this build has been able to handle it all, win almost every single fight, and only occasionally end in a stalemate versus some incredibly tanky enemies. I've been having such a good time with this build in Cyrodiil for the past few days that everyone in Twitch chat have been asking me to make a build video to showcase a little bit more information than just a list of sets about this build so that you guys can use it too. And so here we are, and without further ado, let's jump right into it, and I'll showcase the sets and the skills that I'm using on this build, and you guys can make fun of me in the comment section for forgetting to gold out my weapons. Starting up with the stats, as you can see, our max magicka is at 36k, 37k on the back bar, our max health at almost 29k, and our max stamina at 20k despite being on a magicka character. Our recoveries, if we buff up real quick, you'll be able to see, are at 1500 magicka recovery, which is just enough to sustain on a magicka Dragonknight this patch. Our health recovery is maybe the big kicker here with 2600 HP recovery, meaning we get 1.3k health every single second even when we're not healing ourselves, which will help us survive versus the zerg. And another great tool that'll help us survive versus the zerg is our stamina recovery at 800, which between the 800 stamina recovery, the 20k max stamina, and our heavy attack weaving on our sword and board back bar, we'll be able to keep the stamina flowing constantly so that we never really get locked down by the zerg using a hard CC and absolutely destroyed. As for our damage, if we recast our potion here and go to the front bar, you can see our spell damage is at 2800. However, if we go ahead and light attack weave at any mob that sadly we don't have around currently, oh, there we are. With just a light attack weave, our spell damage is at 3.2k, which obviously means that we'll have quite a decent amount of spell damage, and that is not even counting the Seething Fury procs, which, as we know right now, do not work on the live server, or at least are not displayed on the live server in your actual tooltip. It's been confirmed to be fixed next patch, but at the moment, sadly, the Seething Fury procs do not increase your actual spell damage on the track. And so we're just going to have to handle that for the time being. But in reality, our spell damage is supposed to be fully buffed at 3.5k, even if it's not displayed on the character sheet. Our spell critical as well, using our potion, goes up to 40%, which is a pretty decent amount considering as there is no Malacath around for us to use, so our spell critical is quite important. But a lot of people are still not using Impen on their body pieces, which makes our critical attacks hit very, very hard. Our resistances, if we just buff up real quick, are at 31k spell resistance and 24k physical resistance. And while that doesn't seem like an insanely huge amount, considering as the majority of the sets are not available right now, and a lot of people have way lower spell and weapon damage than they normally would, these resistances are definitely more than enough to keep us going even when we're fighting a very large zerg. Our critical resistance is at 2500, which obviously is more than enough to counter enemy critical attacks, and our spell penetration, as you can see right now, is at 7k, but we also get an additional 6k from elemental drain, meaning that in reality our spell penetration against enemies is roughly 13k. So between the very high spell penetration, the very decent spell damage, and the quite high max magicka, we definitely do not lack damage on this build whatsoever. Next to our sets, at the moment, we are using one piece of Swarm Mother just for the max magicka and max stamina, and the very same for the one piece of Dummy House as well. Both of these Monster Helms one piece just give us a whole lot of stats that we can definitely use on this build. For the body pieces, we are using 5 pieces of Amber Plasm, which is fantastic to give us great recoveries for our health, magicka, and stamina all together, and quite a bit of magicka related stats as well for our offense. Next up, we are using willpower on the front bar for a little bit of extra damage, and endurance on the back bar for some more health recovery. So the way that it works is we have 2 endurance pieces on the jewelry and 1 willpower, and then our staff is of willpower, and our sword and board are 1 of willpower and 1 of endurance, meaning on the front bar we have 3 pieces of willpower and 2 pieces of endurance, and on the back bar we have 2 pieces of willpower and 3 pieces of endurance. So we are always benefiting the 2-piece bonus of both sets, but the 3rd piece bonus is only available for willpower on the front bar and for endurance on the back bar. I'll go over all of my pieces right now so you guys can see what exactly I am using. But obviously it would be ideal to gold out my weapons, which I totally forgot to do. And ideally you would also not have the 1 well-fitted piece that I have right now, and instead replace it with another sturdy or impen piece, whichever fits your playstyle better. Next, for our skills, starting with the front bar, our good old Burning Embers, a great dot that doesn't cost too much and deals a pretty decent damage over time to enemy players, but most importantly, it heals you based on the damage done. The great thing about Burning Embers is you can apply it to multiple enemy targets, and whenever you recast it after a few seconds, or it wears off of an enemy, or potentially the enemy cleanses the effect, you instantly get a surge of health that scales based on your damage done with the skill. And considering as we have a very high damage build, the healing power we're going to get from Burning Embers is going to be very, very effective. Next, we have Molten Whip, which is not to be used as a spammable like a lot of people tend to think. Molten Whip is our burst damage. You don't want to spam it because it will never give you any Seething Fury buff in that scenario. What you want to do instead is cast a lot of additional Ardent Flames abilities while the Molten Whip is slotted on your front bar, meaning your Burning Embers and a few casts of Engulfing Flames, and then when you have 3 stacks of Seething Fury already applied, then you want to hit the Molten Whip for a massive amount of burst that can be really well used in combination with either Leap as your ultimate or Fossilize as a good CC to lock down an enemy, deal a whole lot of damage to them with Molten Whip, and then finish them off. Next up, we have Engulfing Flames, which is an additional dot that deals a whole lot of damage to enemies, but also debuffs enemies and increases your damage dealt to them with flame damage attacks, which is nearly everything that we are using on this build. And on top of that, it is also used as our main spammable, considering as we don't want to use Molten Whip because we want to build it up first, and we don't want to recast Burning Embers too often because we want to use it again to claim a big heal after 5 or 7 seconds that it has been chilling on an enemy player. We instead want to use Engulfing Flames very often as our spammable, reduce the enemy's HP a little bit, and then whenever you're ready for the big burst, you leap them into the Molten Whip and finish the enemy off. Next up, we've got Fossilize, which is one of the strongest stuns in the entire game. It locks an enemy player for 3 seconds, deals a little bit of damage to them, and after they break free, they are immobilized, which means they have to break free and then roll dodge to get away from your damage. All the while, you can keep slamming on them, keep applying your dots to them. Really great skill that helps you a lot, especially against mobile classes like Magzorks, which are definitely very common during these tests. And you can lock them down after they attempt to streak, and then they have to break free and then streak away from you again. And in the meantime, you can apply a couple of dots to them to keep applying damage to them even while they are far away from you. Next up, we have got Elemental Drain from the Destro skill line. It is a great skill because it applies 2 really great and important debuffs to your enemies, which are Major Breach, which reduces your enemy resistances by 6k, practically adding 6k penetration to all your attacks, and also it applies Minor Magicka Steal to the enemy, which helps us sustain a bit better. So as long as you have Elemental Drain and either Engulfing Flames or Burning Embers applied to the same enemy, you get a little bit of a Magicka return every single second until the effect wears off, which is obviously very, very effective. The skill also doesn't cost you anything to use, so it's important to keep applying it to targets whenever you can. Whenever an enemy target is running away from you, streaking away, roll dodging away, whatever it is, this is your perfect time while you're chasing them and you cannot hit your abilities on melee range yet. You instead apply your elemental drain to them, and then you catch up to them, stun them, and start dealing damage to them. As for our front bar ultimate, we are using Ferocious Sleep. Obviously, the best MagDK ultimate. A lot of people tend to use standard, but in my opinion, standard is not a very good ultimate to use because standard is a static ultimate, and even if you use shifting standard to constantly recast it on enemies as they run, you're not going to deal a whole lot of damage using it. Enemies are going to roll dodge away from you, enemies are going to streak away from you, and standard doesn't help you deal damage to them. So if you want to keep up with mobile enemies and be able to beat them despite the Magzork infestation, Ferocious Sleep is definitely what you want to be using. You apply some dots to enemies, you buff up to 3 stacks of Seething Fury with Molten Whip, and then you leap the enemy down, you use the whip on them, and you finish them off. A really, really strong ultimate that deals a lot of damage to enemies and gives you a little bit of a damage shield as well to help you stay on the offense for a longer amount of time after you cast it. On the back bar, we are using, first of all, Meditate. I know that a lot of people tend to criticize the use of Meditate, but I have some clips of fights that I'll include later, and you guys will be able to see just how effective Deep Thoughts or Meditate is. This skill helps you sustain your health and your magicka and your stamina all at the same time. We'll talk in a moment about your survivability on the back bar, but Meditate is a huge part of it. It helps you sustain really, really well, especially if you can lock an enemy player using Fossilize and then jump into Deep Thoughts and sometimes get even 3 seconds of sustain for free while your enemy is struggling to catch up with you. If you're fighting a Zerg and you want to line of sight and kite around a tower, this is the perfect skill to use to keep your stamina flowing and your magicka to never run out as you fight multiple enemies, because the moment you jump around the tower, go around, line of sight your enemy, they cannot interrupt you, and you can just sit in Deep Thoughts for quite a few seconds and generate a whole lot of resources. We are using Cauterize on the back bar as well. In the past, I used to use the offensive morph of Cauterize Flames of Oblivion as my spammable on the front bar, but at the moment we are able to sustain Engulfing Flame as our main spammable, so we can afford to use Cauterize on the back bar to get a pretty decent amount of heal over time. Every 5 seconds, we get a surge of health getting back to us, which will obviously help us survive really, really well in fights, and will help us survive in a Zerg as well. When the enemy Zerg is slamming on you and you lose more HP than you can heal using your Coag, then the additional health you get per second with Cauterize will help you survive the enemy Zerg that is currently chasing you down. Normally, Cauterize is a skill better used on the front bar because it gives you your Major Prophecy, which increases your spell critical, but we are getting that benefit from our potion, which also gives us our spell damage buff, Major Sorcery, which we will get to in just a moment. But because we get this benefit from the potion we use, we don't need to front bar Cauterize, and it's okay to use it on the back bar, even though normally it is not very recommended. Next up, we have Coagulating Blood, obviously our main heal and our oh shit button. It heals us for a very, very decent amount, but it also costs a whole lot. So you definitely don't want to spam Coagulating Blood. You want to make sure to heal yourself using Cauterize, using your health recovery, and most importantly, using Burning Embers, so that you don't have to burn all of your magicka on spamming Coagulating Blood, run out completely, and then get killed by enemy players because you can no longer heal yourself with your magicka pool empty. Coagulating Blood also gives us a Major Fortitude, which is very important because we rely quite a bit on health recovery on this build. Next up, we got Race Against Time, which is obviously our Psijic Scaline Mobility skill. The options to replace this skill that people tend to use would be a Mist Form, and I do not recommend using Vamprism and Mist Form on this build. I think that Vamprism is very nice to kite sometimes, but you don't really need it on this build. It is not super important to have Mist Form because Race Against Time is a valid option, and you don't get all the cost increase to your skills that Vamprism normally gives you, so you can just use Race Against Time instead, sustain a lot better, and it still gives you everything you need. It gives you Minor Force, which increases your critical damage, which is absolutely fantastic considering as we have 40% critical rate. It gives us some movement speed increase with a major expedition, and it removes all our snares and immobilizations that we have applied to us, which is the main reason we use this skill, to keep our mobility, to keep moving, and also to help us a little bit with our damage potential. If you are fighting too many Magsorks and you're really struggling against them, another option to use is Protective Plate. You can morph Protective Scale into Protective Plate and gain the immunity to snares and immobilizations that you get from a Race Against Time. However, you will be missing the crit damage and the extra speed, so I recommend using Race Against Time. But obviously, if you are fighting too many Magsorks, then using Protective Plate will be more relevant, as it reduces all of their burst damage by 50%. Next up, we've got Volatile Armor, which is our major resolve buff, which gives us 6k extra resistances. Super important to have applied to you at all given moments, and it helps us deal some damage around us and a damage return to enemies that attack us in melee range. So obviously a very, very good skill that every DK needs to have on their bars. Lastly, our backbar ultimate is Temporal Guard from the Psijic skill line. We are not actively using this skill very often, occasionally to jubate some enemies, but for the most part, we only want to use this skill for the passive ability we get while it's slotted, which gives us our minor protection, which reduces our damage taken by 5%. It is just nice to have on the backbar, because while you're on the backbar healing anyways, you tend to take a lot of damage from enemies, so mitigating a bit more damage is definitely a nice benefit. The main thing that is very important on this build, while obviously our offensive potential is very strong between our penetration, our combos which deal a whole lot of damage with Molten Whip and Leap combination, our defense on the other hand is a bit more tricky. And so here is basically how I do it, and here is what is so unique about this build and its survivability. As you guys already saw, our survivability is great in terms of the health recovery, which if we buff up using Coag and get our major fortitude on, we have 2600 health recovery, meaning 1.3k health per second, even when we're not actively healing ourselves. In addition to that, on the back bar, we can cast Cauterize, which will keep us healed every 5 seconds, and then we can, on top of all that, go into Meditate. Meditate itself gives us a decent amount of health every single second while sustaining us, but also while we are in Meditate, we benefit from the Deliberation passive from the Psijic Order, which gives us major protection, and we also have our minor protection from Temporal Guard, meaning our damage on the back bar is reduced by 15% while we are inside Meditate. Our Cauterize keeps us healed every 5 seconds, and our health recovery with Major Fortitude and our base health recovery keeps giving us health every second. Meaning that we constantly get more and more health even while we're just on the back bar in Deep Thoughts. So a lot of the times you would see me in the middle of a fight. If I'm being zerged by enemies, I just stun an enemy player and then jump away into Deep Thoughts on the back bar, and I gain a lot of health every single second while I'm sustaining my resources, rather than being damaged by enemy players. A lot of the times in a fight, I'll be able to even stand in Deep Thoughts while enemy players are attacking me if I have CC immunity and they cannot interrupt the cast, and just keep healing myself and keep sustaining myself all at the same time while the enemies are only wasting away their resources, and then I'll be at a much better stance to be able to win the 1vx scenario. Next to our champion points, I'm going to go over every single tree very quickly so you guys can see exactly what I am using and use it yourself if you choose to. And next, for some general information. On this build, we are using the Lady Mundus. It is very important for us to have some better resistances than the default, considering as we're using light armor for the most part. The Lady Mundus helps us survive and help increase our both physical and spell resistances, which is very important. For our food, we are using the Bewitched Sugar Skulls, which give us max health, magicka, and stamina, as well as some additional health recovery, which obviously helps our survivability. For the potions, we are for the most part using Essence of Spell Power, which gives us our major sorcery buff since we are not using Degeneration, our major prophecy since our Cauterize is on the back bar, and give us some additional magicka and magicka sustain with major intellect. A very powerful potion that I definitely recommend using. I normally tend to use tri-stat potions on a lot of my builds, but I don't feel like it is very relevant in this build, considering as you get a major fortitude from coagulating blood anyways, and your stamina regen is so good on its own between the regen and the heavy attack weaves that you don't really need to get your major endurance on this build. And so getting the major sorcery and major prophecy for the front bar using your potion is very, very important. We are not playing as a vampire, as I mentioned before. I don't feel like playing Vamprism currently is worth it. Of course, Mistform is a nice benefit, but Race Against Time does just fine, and you don't have to pay with additional cost to all your skills due to Vamprism. And for the race, I am currently using a Breton, mainly for the Magicka cost reduction, since we are using all Magicka costing abilities, except for Deep Thoughts and Elemental Drain, which are free, of course. The Magicka cost reduction is very, very important, and of course we get some additional nice passives from being a Breton. If you guys have a High Elf or a Dark Elf or even a Nord, this patch on a Dragonknight, it is really, really not bad to use either and will work just fine on this build. You might need one Magicka Recovery enchantment compared to what I have, which is obviously the 3 spell damage ones, but overall, you should be fine with these races as well. Breton is just my personal favorite. And that's about it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and will find this build useful for yourselves as well. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the like button and make sure to hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more from me. There will also be the links to my live stream on Twitch down below in the description, as well as my community Discord. So if you guys would like to get in touch with me, definitely go ahead and check out those 2 links. And I'm going to go ahead and play some clips that I've recorded with this build in Cyrodiil since the test has started. Hope you guys will enjoy those as well. And take care, everybody.
Crossing the waters, breaking all the limits, then I'm pushing it harder. Striking every match, light it up where it's dark. Now just ain't enough for me. All the stuff that we said has been wasted so many times. My trust I've been tainted, line up excuses, it's all getting gated. Leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. What are you waiting for? Get up and get it done. As I'm running the corners, waiting for the wave, take me across all the borders, riding like the wind, going down without warning, just ain't enough for me. All the stuff that we've done has been hasted so many times, my trust has been tainted, line up excuses, it's all overrated, leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. What are you waiting for? Get up and get it done. What are you waiting for? The journey's just begun. Crossing the waters, breaking all the limits, then I'm pushing it harder. Striking every match, light it up where it's dark. Now just ain't enough for me.